Story 1. My husband works at a small home security company, so he meets a lot of new clients after some scary incident has occurred. One family was going all out. Cameras, sensors, motion detectors, silent alarm, panic room, etc. The two kids, 14 and about 8, had been home alone after school. They were making snacks and hanging out in the kitchen when they noticed men in black ski masks running toward the sliding glass door that opened up from the backyard, directly to the kitchen where the kids were. The teenage girl fortunately didn't hesitate for even a second, as some people might. You have a lot of social programming that might make you pause to see if they are going to knock. Maybe they are cops who are coming to help you, etc. The girl grabbed the little boy and her cell phone and ran them to her parents' bedroom. This turned out to be really lucky, because her parents had the only solid core door inside the house. They heard the glass of the patio door break as they ran into the bedroom. The girl locked the door and started pushing furniture and a pile of laundry in front of the door. If you've ever tried to open a door with a towel on the other side of it, you know how difficult it is. The girl had the little boy calling 911 while she stacked furniture in front of the door. They heard the men clearing the rooms until they got to the parents' bedroom. The men tried the doorknob and then started pounding on the door. The doorknob was being hit from the other side and she was trying to hold it still. There were a few seconds of silence, then she heard some sort of power tool start up outside the door. The kids thought they saw shadows from people outside the bedroom window. The police were on the phone and they were on their way. But of course, the seconds were out forever. The kids finally heard sirens, and when the sirens got close enough, the noise in the hall stopped. The police had a hell of a time getting in the bedroom and convincing the girl it was okay. She heard her hands holding the doorknob even when it was locked, and she heard her stomach and back pushing furniture. The door frame had been partially sawed through. They found guns and black tarp material in the hallway. The parents were investigated heavily because that type of home invasion sounds like a personal attack more than a robbery. But nothing was found. The 911 call audio recorded a lot of the event, which corroborated the evidence found and the kids' story. The family was a modest middle-class family. They lived in average suburbs in an average city and weren't up to anything weird. Neighbors didn't see anything that whole time until the cops got there. One thought they heard a scream maybe. They ultimately concluded it was an attempted kidnapping related to trafficking. There are a significant number of incidents like these that never make the news. There have been a few snatches and grab attempts of smaller kids at grocery stores and shopping malls in the area. What's really scary is this could be you. Even if you have all the preparation in the world, it's just a random combination of factors that makes the difference. Grabbing the phone as you run, choosing a bedroom to hide in with a high exterior window and a solid core door, having some dirty clothes by the door, having police nearby, etc. Story 2. This was roughly about 3 years ago. Where I grew up, there's a road called Indian Cabin Road. It's a long road that intersects several other roads, eventually going from pavement to dirt after a bit. You eventually end up near a river and another town, but for a while, you drive through the woods with no guidance except for the dirt road since no phones get a signal out there. Now, being from a small town, every kid knows about it. It's almost a rite of passage. I 100% know that if I were to walk up to any local at a Wawa and ask about Indian Cabin Road, they'd immediately say, yeah, that place is haunted, and leave it at that. So anyway, my best friend and I decided to find it and drive down it the night of Halloween. After searching our maps and finding the street it forked off of, we drove down in her Caprice thinking, all the while, why the fuck did we choose the worst car in the world to go off-roading? She's a firm believer in the supernatural, so the whole time she's playing up the fact that it's Halloween and we're driving down the most haunted road in our town. I'm rolling my eyes, trying not to laugh because fuck it, it is Halloween, and I might as well enjoy the supposed spookiness of it all. We end up driving most of it without realizing it until we reach the part where the road is essentially a dirt pathway. Not even 10 minutes later, my friend inexplicably stops her car and says that she doesn't want to drive down anymore because her car can't handle it. Before I can even reply, I hear her say, "Horse opera." What the fuck is that in the most bone-chilling, terrifying voice I have ever heard in my life? In the tree line, there's what only I can describe as this spinal skeleton thing staring at us with glowing red eyes. It was on all fours, but its body was stretched out so that its back legs were bigger than its front. It was pitch black outside at this point, but both her high beams and headlights were on, so I'm 100% certain it was not a human in a morph suit or an animal or anything in between. It stared at this inky black creature and started to move towards us. Now, in high-stress situations, I usually end up laughing to calm my fears, and at this point, I started chuckling, telling her it was just a wolf that's nothing to be afraid of. My friend immediately booked it out there, repeatedly asking me what it was and what was happening. All I kept saying, all I could say really was, "It's just a wolf." I was legitimately scared, and to this day, I have no idea what the fuck we saw. We haven't driven down there since, and my friend repeatedly brings it up whenever I mention I don't believe in the supernatural. Story 3. My dad liked to take me camping, usually once or twice a year. We lived in Michigan, and he loved to go out to obscure areas deep in the woods up north, as opposed to standard campgrounds. In fact, for the longest time, I thought camping was nothing but going deep into the woods in search of a clearing and being miles away from civilization. Anyway, one year we ended up going really far out, much further than we had been before. I don't know the location or even a general idea of where we were, as I was never told specifics. What I do know is that the year prior, he had tried to take his truck up what at the time I called a mountain, but I know that isn't the case now, and had failed miserably. So he went out and bought a new truck, a 4AR4, and he was going to push it to its limit. We ended up basically driving where a vehicle wasn't really intended. There was no road system, and we pushed through with barely enough room to squeeze by until the trees became so thick we couldn't drive any further. We got out and walked maybe a quarter of a mile until we came to a clearing. It seemed to be a previous campsite, as there were signs of a fire pit and some wood already chopped. The sun was starting to set, and we hastily put up our tents and started a fire. The next day we did what we usually did when camping, explore. To the east of the campsite was kind of like a swamp. To the north the way we came, and so we decided to go west into what we thought was a less dense part of the forest. We found out that wasn't the case pretty quickly, as the trees became closer and closer together. We were walking for maybe 30 minutes, not sure exactly, could have been shorter or longer, when we came into a clearing. The place, from what I recall, was extremely strange. First, there was this cabin, just sitting there in the middle of nowhere, and surrounding it looked like a bunch of garbage, rusted out cars, and rusted car parts. The cabin looked to be in really bad shape, and I remember there being pots and pans strung outside of it. From the cabin, I could clearly hear a woman yelling, very loudly. I don't know what she was saying, I'm not sure if it was even English, and there was a lot of banging, like metal on metal, coming from inside too. I wasn't concerned about the yelling because to the left from where we entered, there appeared to be this massive crack in the ground. From where we were standing, it looked really deep, but not wide, to the point where you could jump from one side to the next, and you started to walk towards it to check it out. Before I could make it too far in, though, my dad grabbed me and turned right around. We headed back to the campsite, doing a sort of walk-jog thing. My dad kept looking back, and I remember he had this fear in his eyes I had never seen before. My dad and I had been through some situations camping, and have come to what I thought was close to death quite a few times, but I had never seen that look before. It wasn't just concern, something more. We got to the campsite, grabbed what we could, but ended up leaving behind some stuff as we immediately headed back to the truck and eventually drove off. We never spoke about it, and I'm not sure what exactly set him off. The reason it's so disturbing for me when I think about it is just the way he acted. He was an extremely brave and at times arrogant person who refused to let people antagonize him. We had 2 rifles with us, and I know from personal experience he was very proficient with them, and he had earned some medal for rifles while he was in the army. So, the fact he was so spooked like we saw something we weren't supposed to is what made it stand out. Story 4. A few years ago, I decided to try out night mountain biking. Basically, you outfit yourself with a few really freaking bright lights and go mountain biking. It's a hell of a lot of fun, most of the time. The first time I tried it, I decided to go by myself because I didn't want to bother any of my friends to do something that may turn out to be really boring. So I'm cruising along up a local mountain bike trail. Now, mind you, this is in the Rockies, so the trails here are steep with lots of switchbacks. Also, there are some animals here who will gladly attack you and kill you. Mountain lions, black bears, grizzly bears, etc., etc., etc. You honestly do have to be careful, especially when you're alone. Especially tonight, as I completely forgot to bring my bear spray. About 1/3 of the way up, I come to a small repose, down a slight hill, so I stop for a second to admire the stars. It was all very peaceful. I can hear some crickets and pretty much nothing else. Now, for many people, this wouldn't be too creepy, but I'm pretty much by myself, the only human for miles in any direction. In those situations, you always have a heightened sense of fight or flight because there is no help coming for you if something goes wrong. Suddenly, to my left, I hear twigs breaking. I spin my head around, lights attached to my helmet, and I see nothing. My left is basically just a cliff. Okay, so it was just a harmless animal. No harm done, I'll just continue up the trail. However, at this point, my stomach is in knots. So I ride up the trail a bit further, enjoying the nothingness surrounding me. I come to a bit of the trail with lots of switchbacks, one right after another, about every 75 yards or so. As I'm about to reach a switchback turning to the left, I spy eyes upon a tree in the middle of the trail to my left. They were about 6.5 feet off of the ground. I quite literally said to myself, oh, it's gotta be a squirrel, nothing else would be that high up. Nope. I turned the corner of the switchback and freaking 10 meters in front of me is a bull moose. Now, many of you may not think that is super scary, but moose are terrifying. They will attack you for no freaking reason, and they will tear you to shreds. They are scarier than black bears. I just stopped. I stood there and watched as this moose turns its massive head and a body toward me, completely blocking the trail. I could hear my heartbeat in my head and feel it in my hands gripping the handlebars bars. My feet were firmly planted on the ground. I had nowhere to go. The trail I had just come up was only a few feet behind the moose, and I certainly couldn't go forward. Not to mention that I heard something about a mile down the trail, so I didn't want to go that way. I briefly thought to myself two quick things. Why the hell did I not bring my beer spray? The best way to get away from a moosey is to run downhill really fast while weaving in and out of trees. Their antlers will get stuck. So I'm sitting here, 10 meters from a bull moose, and we're staring each other down. His glowing eyes impart more and more fear every second. My stomach is in even more knots than it was. I was paralyzed with fear. Then he snorted, breathed out really hard. I said to myself, fuck this shit, time to leave. Grabbed my bike by the top tube between my legs, pointed it down the hill, and pedaled as hard and as fast as I could. Now, the trails here in the Rockies often have cliffs beside them, and this one was no exception. So I was flying down this 2-foot wide trail, in the pitch black, running from a freaking moose, with a death cliff to my left. Lovely. Fortunately, that went well. About a mile down the trail I looked back and no moose was following me, thank goodness. So then I was riding at a moderate pace, at this point thoroughly freaked out, vowing never to ride in the dark again. I'm heading to the point I stopped at on the way up, where I heard the noise the first time. After this point is a small, maybe half-mile uphill, but it's rather steep. I'm fully aware that the last time I rode through this part there was some sort of animal in this area. I'm willing my bike not to get a flat tire or stop for any reason. Then, as I crest a small hill about to go up the steep half-mile hill, I see it. At this point I say to myself, you've got to be fucking kidding me. It was not a harmless animal that I heard of for the first time, it was a fucking black bear. This time it's off to the side of the trail about 15 meters, but I literally have nowhere else to go. There are no more trails, I can't turn around. So I pedaled. I pedaled as hard as I could, up this hill, internally screaming, don't stop, don't stop, don't stop, you're not tired, don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. I kept pedaling and never looked back. As I crested this hill, I was fully aware that I had about 2,000 feet of descending to do. My heart was pounding out of my chest, my legs were burning more than they've ever burned, and my lungs had no more to give. Despite riding down the side of a mountain, I felt my heartbeat throughout my entire body the whole way. I could hear it in my ears, feel it in my feet. This trail was also a one-way trail, so this direction was not made to descend. No berms, no nothing. I fall off the edge and I fall down a cliff. Every time I approach a switchback, I dread pulling the brake lever for fear that something will catch up to me or shortcut through the trees and attack me from the side. Every time I have to go around the switchback, I sneak a peek back up the hill, looking for glowing green eyes following me. But I never once slowed down more than enough to keep me from dying. I swore I saw the eyes on the first switchback down the hill. After that, I was afraid to look. I eventually made it to my car. I rode up to it and parked behind it, relative to the trail. I just sat there, in the dark, with my head on a swivel, waiting for something to attack me. After a few minutes, my heartbeat left my ears and I dismounted my bike. I could barely stand. My chest hurt, and my knees were quite literally weak and shaking. My hands weren't steady enough to undo the zipper on my pack to grab my keys and unlock the car. I had to force myself to take a few deep breaths just to get the bike on the rack and in the car. I drove home that night with no radio, no windows, barely moving. Just staring forward at the road. Didn't even bother to take my bike off the rack until the next morning. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Story 5. Back in 2008, I was 15, and I lived on a 300-acre ranch in a small town in Idaho. I lived in a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, 1980s cheaply built home with my parents and sister. My 6 older brothers had already grown up and moved out. Yes, I know, big family. My sister and I slept in the bedrooms upstairs, just down the hall from my parents' room. Her room was directly across from mine. That year I started having nightmares about dark figures, and then I would wake up around the same time every night, 3 a.m. Well, one night I woke up, looked out into the hallway, and a dark figure walked past my door. I blinked a few times, decided I was dreaming, and went back to sleep. The next day I moved my bed so that when I woke up, I wouldn't look out the door into the hallway, thus making it harder to imagine things walking by at night. So 3 a.m. comes around again, and I wake up to a woman's voice singing this high-pitched, eerie song right next to my ear. There was this dark, heavy feeling in the air, and I stopped breathing. The singing continued, and then, ever so softly, I felt someone or something playing with my hair, softly running its hands down my red hair. I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer because I was too terrified to speak a word out loud. As soon as I finished praying, the song stopped, and I heard a scream fade away. The next day, I told my mom about the experience, and she dismissed it as a dream. I forced myself to believe her. It had to be a dream because if it was real, I wouldn't ever be able to sleep again. Dream or not, I moved my bed back to where it had been the night before. 3 a.m. came around again, and suddenly I found myself awake staring at the dark hallway between my and my sister's rooms. That's when a dark, slender figure walked in between our rooms and stood in the hallway. It turned its head and looked into my sister's room and then into my room. Back into my sister's room and then turned to look back into my room again. My heart was pounding through my chest and all I wanted to do was scream, but I couldn't. I was so scared that I froze. The figure paused and almost smiled. It wasn't a smile because I couldn't make out its face, but it was like it knew it had me. Then just as I was gathering the courage to scream, the figure got down on its hands and knees and started crawling into my room. I screamed the most pathetic scream of my life and yelled, "There is something in my room." My parents flipped on the lights and came running into my room to find nothing. To this day, my parents say I was dreaming. I switched rooms after that and even now refuse to sleep in that room when I visit my folks. I don't know what I saw or what happened. All I know is that it did happen. Story 6. When I was about 12, I loved to climb trees, and at my daycare, I was the only one who knew how, so I and all my friends were trying to find the biggest tree in the area surrounding the playground, and we did. Tall and wide with no branches at the bottom, one really long thin branch about 8 feet up. Decided I should climb it, so I wrapped my arms and legs around it and somehow managed to shimmy my way up to that branch. Got up there, and my muscles were tanked to the point of shaking. It felt amazing though. All my friends were oohing and eyeing. Then suddenly I lose my balance and fall backward off the thin branch. I remember seeing all of my friends' faces scared I was about to drop 8 feet to the ground and onto my head when suddenly I felt a hand against my back. It's not a force or a push, but literally the feeling of a hand pressed against the middle of my back, and it slowly pushes me up and I regain my balance. When I felt that hand, I was completely vertical, and my friends were all very confused at what they saw. Still don't know how to explain it. Another time I was late for something, sprinting to it, and I took a shortcut across the train tracks. I heard the train coming and it was pretty close, but I assumed I could sprint across and I'd make it no problem. There was a dip from the height of where I was running from and the actual tracks, so I lost footing, smacked my knee right into the train track and just blacked out from the pain. with the sound of the train honking so loud over and over. When I came to, I was limping towards my girlfriend's house, where I was going in the first place. I had a huge gash on my knee, and I remember thinking I was dead. I just started laughing so loud like a crazy person. The funny thing is, to get to where I was, I would have had to get up, climb a hill, hop a fence, and continue walking down the street for about 5 minutes. This means I was unconscious for about 7 to 10 minutes, and I can't account for any of it. I don't know how to explain the feeling, but when you dodge death like that more than once in your life, it gets so ridiculous you almost can't help but laugh. Story 7. I was 12 years old, and we were 3 kids sharing 2 bedrooms, so my dad decided to put up a half wall to make a third. If I stood on my bed, I could see into my brother's room. We were young and used to throw a ball over before falling asleep. One night I was just drifting off when my mom tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Psst, what are you doing?" I thought that was a very weird question. Obviously, I'm sleeping. So I turned around to answer her, only it was not my mom. It's not a person. It looked like a 3D shadow of a man, just black. I screamed while my eyes were closed and the figure disappeared. My mom and dad came running into my room. I told them everything. They thought it was just my imagination, but tell me if I was scared. To go sleep in the room with my brother. I tried to sleep, but I was shaking. My brother woke up once to go use the bathroom upstairs, and I pretended I was asleep. I didn't want him to know I was still afraid. I hear him go into my room right next door, climb on the bed, springs, and then just stop. I thought he was trying to purposefully scare me, so I looked up to show him I was awake and saw the figure again. Arms crossed with its head resting on his hands. Even though it had no facial features whatsoever, I knew it was looking at me. I try to convince myself it's just dark, it's my brother playing a prank and I'm seeing things. Then I heard the toilet flush upstairs. It was just that one night. I never saw anything like it again, or even close. But years later, in my 20s, I was living alone and felt the tap on my shoulder. "Psst, what are you doing?" I'll stop there because you'll think I'm crazy, but that was the last time I heard it. Story 8. I was on a backpacking trip on the Appalachian Trail, and my dad and I stopped at one of the many public cabins. We set our bags down and joined the campfire. It was just us and a middle-aged Asian couple. We begin talking, and the sun sets, so we don't expect anyone else to come. Nevertheless, this huge guy with long silver hair sets his small pack down under the awning and joins us at the fire. He was no less than 6'8", extremely muscular, and had his hair tied back into a ponytail. Imagine a more muscular Geralt from The Witcher. We start talking and he seems very friendly. Then, my dad asked the man, "So, where are you from?" No response. My dad repeats the question, thinking the guy didn't hear him. No response. The Asian guy asks the question and suddenly the big guy explodes, yelling, "I don't know. I don't fucking know." He then takes out a huge Bowie knife and a whetstone and starts sharpening it. All of us decided to pack our stuff and book it to the next cabin, which was about 7 miles away. It was a walk, but we eventually made it there, and there was a dirty hippie dude already there. He stunk like hell but was harmless. We stop at the campfire and hang out for a bit. Then I see a reflection out of the corner of my eye. I turn around and see the big silver-haired guy standing on the tree line, spying on us. At that moment, I nearly shit my pants, because there was no way all of us could take this guy on. He was built like a WWE wrestler, and we were all under 6'0". I let the other people know, and the Asian guy took out a revolver and told the man to go the fuck off. The big guy stands there for a moment and silently walks off into the woods without making any sound. After that incident, we agreed to have someone keep watch. Since the Asian guy had a gun, he volunteered while we slept. In the morning, I was so glad the big guy didn't come back because the Asian man had fallen asleep. That shit still gives me chills. Story 9. I've had a creepy coworker follow me all the way home. It freaked me the hell out. The worst part of it was that most people didn't believe me. This is a guy who would just stand in the doorway of my cubicle, enough that I got a rearview mirror for my computer monitor so I could see how long he stood there, without saying anything. He did it a lot and would stand for minutes without saying a word, just watching me. Sometimes he would ask me questions, like what kind and color of car I drive, and then would say, "I'm just asking because I thought I saw you the other day." In hindsight, the questions don't seem so innocuous. So when I looked in the side view mirror of my car when I was a block away from our apartments and saw his face, I was in shock. I couldn't believe he'd actually gone that far. I was on the phone with my husband and told him what I was seeing. I thought I must be going crazy, so I continued to the apartments while watching him see if he followed. Sure enough, he followed. Followed me down a street that was merely an entry point for a small neighborhood in my complex. It isn't used really for anything else, and I knew where he lived, so I knew he had no business being there. I turned into the complex, and there he was right behind me. My building was located in a really squirrely part of the complex, way at the back but in the middle, so you had to drive a circuitous path to get there. And he was behind me the whole time, so I didn't go to my building. I passed the turn to go to it and booked it around to the complex exit and tore down the street into the neighborhood, turned around, parked at the end of the street and watched the complex exit to see if he would come out. I mean, maybe he was visiting someone who just happened to live there. I kept telling myself that. But nope, there he was. Pulled right out of the complex and drove towards the direction of where he lived. I told my boss the next day, totally freaked out. She kind of believed me. It sounded absurd, but she knew I wouldn't make it up, but no one else in charge did. They handled it appropriately at my job and all, but they couldn't really do anything. They could only counsel him on the harassment of watching me work. It scared me, but I wanted him to know I knew and wasn't going to put up with it. So, when he approached me and accused me of being rude to him because I had refused to speak to him ever since that day, I responded with, "I saw you." He said, "What do you mean?" And I repeated myself. He just turned and walked away. I've had other people stalk me and/or my home, former homeowners with mental problems. But this one was just too close. It's terrifying to know that if we weren't as observant, we could have had a much different ending. I'm grateful you're safe.